Hi everyone, Pickled Dill here. Before we get into this week's video, I just want to explain why it's going to look a bit different from the ones that have come before. In this week's video, there will only be a single static image of the thumbnail, and this is for two reasons. The first is that for most of the last week, I have been pretty sick, and so haven't been able to produce a video like I normally would. The second, and more troubling, is the Show Pro Gambit. If you don't know what this is, there's a link to a video describing it in my community tab. In essence, it is a new legal gambit created by Shueisha Productions, which enables them to remove YouTube channels which use any form of Japanese IP. As a result, I will be trying out this new form of static image, and depending on your feedback, may continue with it moving forward. But, with that said, let's get on to part 4 of What If Ash Was Brandon's Son. We pick up where we left off, the Heart Home City tag battle competition, with Ash facing down his tag partner, a purple-haired youth who seems to hate him. When Ash fails to return his glare, or react with any form of recognition at all, the young man's scowl seems to deepen, causing Ash to be rather tentative when he asks, "What's got this guy so mad?" The young man snaps that they met once before at the Battle Pyramid. This triggers Ash's memory, and he recalls how this boy once accompanied a man who challenged Ash's father and lost rather badly. It seems the young man is remembering the same incident, since he growls that Brandon broke his brother's spirit that day. Ash says he's sure his father didn't mean to do anything like that, but the purple-haired youth says that what's done is done, and all that's left is for him to get his payback by crushing Brandon as thoroughly as Brandon crushed Reggie. Ash sarcastically mutters that he's lucky he got paired with such a nice guy, but his partner snaps that he doesn't care about nice, he cares about winning. Not wanting to get drawn into a fight, Ash says that if he wants to win, they'll need to work together, and so in an attempt to make a fresh start, he extends his hand and introduces himself as Ash. However, the young man slaps the gesture aside, grunting that his name is Paul, and that Ash should remember it, since it's the name of the person who will beat him once he's done with this tournament. He then storms away, telling Ash to stay out of his way both on the battlefield and off it. Grumbling that Paul seems like a real jerk, Ash goes off to find his friends while he waits for the battles to begin. He finds Barry paired up with a woman named Holly, and unlike with him and Paul, the pair seem to be chatting amiably. Not wanting to interrupt them, Ash goes to find Caitlyn, who is standing beside a green-haired young man with glasses. When Ash gets within earshot, he hears the young man muttering about strategy in a tone that is both condescending and creepy. This seems to annoy Caitlyn, so she welcomes the distraction of Ash when she sees him. Ash approaches them and introduces himself, with the green-haired young man returning the favour, calling himself Conway the Master Tactician. Ash says that sounds like a mouthful, but Conway chuckles that he wouldn't expect Ash to understand. He then assures Ash that with his superior mind at the helm, he and Caitlyn will win this tournament without any trouble. As he does this, he lays a hand on Caitlyn's hip, and Ash doesn't need to be psychic to know what will happen next. With a faint pop, both Caitlyn and Conway vanish, and a moment later when Caitlyn returns, she is alone, with a light dusting of snow in her hair. Not sure he wants to know the answer, Ash asks where Conway is, and in a very amused voice, Caitlyn answers that he needed to chill out. She then says she needs to go speak to the event organisers about finding a new partner, and wishes Ash good luck in the first round. Ash wishes her the same, and then takes his place when the buzzer sounds for the battles to begin. The first match was meant to be Caitlyn and Conway, but due to his absence, this is shuffled to the end of the round. As a result, Barry and Holly are up next, with Holly using her Wingull and Barry using Prinplup. Their opponent uses a Yanma and a Bagon, so Barry decides that he'll have Prinplup take down Yanma and leave Bagon to Wingull. But then he stops himself, remembering what Argenta told him about hastiness, and so asks Holly how she thinks they should approach this fight. Holly smiles, saying that she expected him to run off on his own, and makes an allusion to having watched his match against Argenta. This makes Barry go red, but he forces himself to stay calm and ask again if Holly has a plan. She says that she does, and tells Barry to help her take down Yanma, and Bagon will be easy picking against them both. Barry nods, and so has Prinplup use Peck on Yanma, while Wingull swoops in moments later with an aerial ace. These both deal super effective damage, but the real harm seems to be to the opposing team's cohesion. At once, Yanma's trainer snaps at his partner that Bagon could have tanked those hits no problem, and so should have protected Yanma. In response, Bagon's trainer says that if his Yanma needs to be carried like that, then maybe Bagon would be better off alone. In unison, Barry and Holly say that can be arranged, causing their opponents to spin around, and see that while they were arguing, Wingull and Prinplup have come in for a second aerial ace combo. This hits the mark with ease, and Yan falls out of the sky unconscious. Yanma's trainer bellows that this is all Bagon Trainer's fault, but before the other can retort, he is hit in the head by his own flying Bagon, knocking both trainer and Pokemon out. Barry and Holly high-five over their flawless victory, while Ash gets a bad feeling that he and Paul will be more like the Bagon and Yanma trainer rather than those two. Finally, it comes time for Ash and Paul to enter the ring. Ash follows Argenta's advice and uses Gible, while Paul brings out a Chimchar. Meanwhile, their opponents bring out Rhydon and Magmar, and they are told to begin the battle. Immediately, both Ash and Paul call for Dig, with their Pokemon tunneling underground, but due to poor synchronicity, their tunnels quickly converge and the pair collide, surfacing early and rubbing their heads. Paul calls both Chimchar and Gible pathetic, while Rhydon takes this opportunity to use an Earthquake. Gible doesn't seem too fazed by this, but Magmar grunts in discomfort and Chimchar screams as the shifting earth swallows it. Ash orders Gible to dig again and rescue Chimchar, while Paul snaps that he should have used this time to attack Magmar while it's vulnerable, and left Chimchar to him. Ash retorts that he can't win this alone, and needs Chimchar's help. Paul scoffs, but when Chimchar and Gible emerge, he orders Chimchar to use Scratch on Magmar. Chimchar leaps at Magmar and scratches at it, but when the smaller fire type backs away, a pillar of flame engulfs it, indicating that it has received a burn for its efforts. But oddly enough, this seems to please Paul, who tells it to use Flamethrower on Rhydon. Chimchar obeys, but the Flamethrower doesn't do much, causing Paul's scowl to return, and him to mutter that the burn wasn't enough after all. Ash doesn't have time to wonder what Paul's mumbling about, as Magmar launches a Fire Punch at Gible. Telling it to counter with Bulldoze, the little dragon ducks under the punch and uses its fin like a knife, stabbing hard into Magmar's stomach. Magmar lets out a howl of pain, then falls to the ground. Ash looks at Paul, hoping to share some of the same victory camaraderie that Barry and Holly had, but Paul doesn't even look at him, instead staring intently at Rhydon, who has Chimchar by the throat and is repeatedly smacking it around with Hammer Arm. Chimchar shrieks piteously for its trainer to save it, but Paul just mutters something about a little more. Ash, however, refuses to accept any more, and has Gible smash into Rhydon with a Bulldoze that forces it to drop Chimchar and recoil. Paul snaps at Ash for screwing up his plan again, but Ash says that any plan that involves letting your Pokemon get tortured is a pretty terrible plan. He then has Gible use Bulldoze again, while Chimchar watches. Reluctantly, Paul has Chimchar use Flamethrower again, catching both Gible and Rhydon, but doing very little to either. After this, Paul just sits back and lets another Bulldoze from Gible win the match for them. With that over, it comes time for Caitlyn's match, and after much deliberation, it is decided that she will be allowed to compete alone, but can only use one Pokemon. Ash and Barry boo that this is unfair, but Caitlyn tells them not to worry for her. She then brings out Curlier against a coughing and Scyther, and so the battle begins. Though to call it a battle would be misleading, when in truth it is closer to a massacre. As soon as it has the go-ahead, Curlier uses a Psybeam, which hits Coffin so hard that it goes flying into Scyther. Despite being several times larger than the poison type, it can't help but be knocked off its feet, and the entangled pair careen into the back wall, shattering it and rendering them both unconscious in one hit. And with that, the match is over before the announcer can fully introduce the combatants. There are disconcerted mutterings in the crowd as Caitlyn recalls her Pokemon and returns to Ash and Barry's side. Seemingly unaware of the unease she has caused, Caitlyn casually tells them that she wants a burger and that they should get going. A bit stunned, Ash and Barry agree, and so the trio depart. After dinner, Ash decides to go train with Gible and Meltan, in the hopes that they can avoid another fraught battle like their last one. The pair work well as sparring partners, developing a friendly rivalry, but their training is cut short when Ash witnesses a blast of energy not too far away. Rushing to check it out, he sees Paul and a group of Pokemon battering Chimchar with a barrage of attacks, while the little fire type is told to stay still and endure. This disgusts Ash, who berates Paul for such barbarism. Paul snaps that Ash doesn't get a say in how he raises his Pokemon, but Ash replies that Chimchar shouldn't be Paul's Pokemon if he treats it like this. Braving the next barrage of attacks, Ash shields Chimchar with his body and scoops it up, telling Paul that he's going to take it to the Pokemon Center, whether Paul likes it or not. Paul says nothing and just storms away with his other Pokemon. Good to his word, Ash brings Chimchar to Nurse Joy, and since Paul is nowhere to be seen, he stays by its bedside all night. As a result, Ash is groggy when Barry and Caitlyn come to wake him and tell him that the second round is starting soon and they need to get to the arena as soon as possible. Ash mumbles that he can't leave Chimchar, but Barry tells him that Paul came by an hour ago and collected it. The mention of Paul angers Ash, but he grits his teeth and follows after his friends. The second round starts just like the first one ended, with Caitlyn's Curlier decimating her opponents in a single hit and advancing to the semi-finals. After that is Barry and Holly, and since their opponent sends out a Ferret and Hitmonchan, Barry decides to use Chatot, while Holly chooses Nosepass. At once, Barry calls for a chatter, but remembers too late the last thing Chatot imitated. In a booming imitation of Caitlyn's voice that fills the whole arena, Chatot declares that Barry is a bird brain. The attack hits for enough damage to knock out Hitmonchan, but at a rather high cost, since soon the entire audience and most of the participants are laughing at him. Barry looks to Holly for support, but to his horror finds that even she is struggling to hold back giggles. Barry howls that he's gonna find everyone who's laughing, but Ferret's trainer says he shouldn't let it bother him, particularly when there's much worse things to worry about, like this. They then have Ferret use Thunder on Chatot, knocking it out in one hit. Barry apologizes to his Pokemon for getting distracted, but Chatot pats his arm comfortingly. They then have no choice but to sit back and watch as Nosepass faces off against Ferret in a one-on-one. Ferret definitely has the speed advantage, but since Thunder will do little good against Nosepass, it has to get in close to strike, and this proves to be its downfall. At point-blank range, Ferret has no chance to escape Nosepass's Zap Cannon, and when it is paralyzed, all it takes is a single rock smash to the face to knock it and its trainer out of the tournament. Barry tells Holly that she's amazing, but Holly doesn't seem to be in the mood for celebrating, since they'll be up against Caitlyn in the next round. Barry gulps when he hears this, but Caitlyn just says that she hopes he'll be able to give her more of a challenge, unlike those bozos, before she departs to watch Ash and Paul's match. Ash and Paul then enter the ring, calling out Gibble and Chimchar like before. In response, their opponents choose Metagross and Zangoose. Paul actually smiles at this, and Ash asks what's got Paul so happy. Paul begrudgingly says that he's been waiting to face a Zangoose for a while now. Ash asks why, but Paul tells him to shut up and focus on Metagross, while Chimchar handles Zangoose. Reluctant to follow Paul's plan, and still angry at him for his treatment of Chimchar, Ash decides to have Gibble use Dragon Breath on Zangoose. The attack connects, and for a moment Zangoose looks like it wants to fight Gibble, but when it sees Chimchar, something about it makes the Cat Ferret Pokemon choose it as its target. As Zangoose runs in, Paul tells Chimchar to use Flamethrower, but instead, Chimchar remains perfectly still and is hit by an X-Scissor. Ash looks at Chimchar to see what's wrong, but to his surprise sees that Chimchar is paralyzed with fear as it stares wide-eyed at Zangoose. Ash snaps that he knew there had to be some awful reason Paul was happy, and that he must have known Chimchar was afraid of Zangoose. Paul confirms this, but says that fear may be the key to unlocking Chimchar's true power. He then calls for a flamethrower, but Chimchar's fear seems to have deafened it, and it shrieks as Zangoose uses Crush Claw to pin its head against the ground. Even as pain drowns out the sound of fear in Chimchar's cries, Chimchar still refuses to move a muscle, and so Ash jumps in, telling Gibble to use Dragon Breath again. This pushes Zangoose off Chimchar, but leaves Gibble open to a bullet punch from the Metagross Ash had forgotten all about in his drive to save Chimchar. Gibble is hit, but as a second one comes for it, Chimchar leaps in the way, taking the hit and repaying its debt. Ash tells Paul that they should swap opponents, since the only thing Paul's getting out of Chimchar facing Zangoose is more trauma for Chimchar. Paul says that's not true, he's also gotten closure. He then turns his back on Ash, Chimchar, and the battle. Chimchar howls for its trainer to forgive it, but Paul is unresponsive, and so Ash has to take the reins. Ash tells Chimchar to use Flamethrower on Metagross, while he has Gibble keep up the Dragon Breath assault on Zangoose. The pair go back to back, using their flames and energy pulses to keep their opponents at bay, and this seems to stymie Metagross, who can't get in without being burned. However, Zangoose's trainer tells his Pokemon to leap up and use Crush Claw on Chimchar, trusting that Terra will give Metagross the opening it needs. This proves correct, as soon as Chimchar sees Zangoose's shadow above it, it freezes, unable to move or even keep its flamethrower burning. Desperately, Ash begins to tell Gibble to use Bulldoze to intercept Crush Claw, but before he can even get the words out, Gibble leaps into action, fully understanding Ash at last. When Gibble and Zangoose clash, Gibble begins to glow, empowered by its bond with Ash. Quickly, its body grows until it is actually larger than Zangoose, and then with a resounding cry of Gabite, it slams once more into its opponent. it, sending it spiraling into the air before crashing into the ground unconscious. Gabite lands more gracefully than Zangoose, but all can see that it is clearly fatigued. Chimchar, now free of its fear, places a steadying hand on Gabite, but they both know it can't afford to take another hit. On the other hand, Metagross, though now at a numbers disadvantage, still looks relatively unharmed. Since Paul will still not command his Chimchar, Ash tells it to use Flame Wheel, while having Gabite use Dig. Both Pokemon nod their understanding, then get to work. By charging head-on, Chimchar is able to draw Metagross's attention, but thanks to its speed while in Flame Wheel, when Metagross fires a bullet punch, it is able to dodge out of the way. This allows Gabite to come in for a surprise attack from underground, which startles it long enough for Flame Wheel to hit and send Metagross spinning. With Metagross now out of control, Ash calls for the pair of Pokemon to finish up with Double Dig. The duo do this, having finally gotten in sync with each other and managed to traverse the underground, while crossing and weaving to confuse Metagross about who is in which tunnel. Finally, they burst up together on either side of their opponent and deliver a united attack that knocks it out. Everyone applauds Chimchar and Gabite for their comeback. Everyone except Paul. He just orders Chimchar to come with him, still not looking back at it. Ash has a bad feeling, and so follows them from a distance, watching as Chimchar and Paul exit the arena. Paul then raises Chimchar's ball, and blue light bathes Chimchar's wounded body, releasing it. Its now former trainer then snaps at Chimchar to get lost, calling it a loser. Dejectedly, Chimchar begins to walk away, but before it can get very far, Ash yells at it to stop, saying that he doesn't think it's a loser at all. He then adds that he really admires Chimchar's guts, and asks if it would like to join his team. Chimchar considers for a moment, but when it becomes clear that Paul won't take it back, it leaps into Ash's arms and allows him to capture it. The next day, the semi-finals begin, and as Holly predicted, the first match is herself and Barry against Caitlyn. Caitlyn sticks with Curlier, while Barry chooses Prinplup and Holly chooses Wingull. As soon as they're told to begin, the duo put their strategy into action. Wingull opens with a powerful blizzard which freezes Curlier solid, while Prinplup rushes in and begins hammering the frozen Curlier with super effective metal claws. They then high-five and proudly declare they spent all night planning on how to overcome Curlier, but it seems their efforts were worth it, since Curlier is now defenseless. Caitlyn admits that it's a very clever strategy, but it does have one hole in it. Barry demands to know what hole, and Caitlyn points at a tiny crack in the ice, caused by repeated metal claws. Curlier's eyes then glow blue, and the crack expands until the ice encasing its body shatters and is psychically lifted to float around it. Caitlyn reiterates that it was a good plan, but good just isn't good enough against her. She then has Curlier hurl the ice chunks at her opponents. Barry's quick thinking allows Prinplup to counter with a flurry of metal claws, deflecting most of the ice, but Holly isn't so lucky, and a few good hits take Wingull out of the fight. Holly apologizes, but Barry says it's not over yet, calling for Bubble Beam, as Caitlyn orders a Psybeam. As planned, the psychic energy paralyzes Prinplup, but Barry still seems undeterred, and scolds that for someone who's seen all his battles, Caitlyn really hasn't figured out his style yet. He then tells Prinplup to use Peck, and though it can't move, its beak is still able to grow, lengthening and popping one of the bubbles. As soon as one bubble bursts, the others start moving and bursting in a chain reaction, which breaks Curlier's concentration. This allows Prinplup to move again, and it charges in to slam a full power metal claw into Curlier's stomach. Curlier curls in on itself, clearly injured, and for a moment Barry thinks he's actually won, but then Caitlyn whispers the command, Shadow Sneak. Suddenly, Curlier vanishes before reappearing behind Prinplup and dealing a karate chop to the back of the neck, which knocks the water type out. Barry slumps to the ground, saying that he worked so hard and he can't believe he lost. But Caitlyn won't have a bar of that. She snaps to get up off the floor and hold his head high, since even though he lost, he still managed to give her the best battle she's had in years. She then holds out a hand to help him to his feet. Barry takes it, and everyone applauds the display of sportsmanship between the two of them. Finally, it comes time for Ash and Paul's semi-final match. With Gabite and Chimchar still at the Pokemon Center, recovering from their intense few days of battle, Ash has no choice but to bring out Meltan. Paul demands to know what type of Pokemon that is, but Ash acidly replies that it's a friend, which explains why Paul can't recognize it. Paul doesn't deign to answer this jibe, and just brings out his Torterra. Their opponents bring out Poliwhirl and Shellos, and the battle begins. At once, Paul calls for a Frenzy Plant, and 6 thorny roots burst from underground, slapping hard against Shellos and Poliwhirl. When they come around for a second swing, Poliwhirl manages to dodge the roots, but Shellos is not so lucky. Caught in its thorns, Shellos is swung around before being slammed headfirst into the ground. When it is declared unable to battle, Ash has Meltan use Thundershock on Poliwhirl. Meltan obediently sends out a jolt of electricity, but before it can hit its opponent, Paul has Frenzy Plant intercept it. Angrily, Ash demands whose side Paul is on, but Paul just grunts, and has Torterra use its roots again to slam into Poliwhirl. Poliwhirl deftly leaps over them, only receiving a few scratches in return and runs at Torterra. Due to the trade-off of Frenzy Plant, Torterra is forced to recharge, leaving it vulnerable to a Hydro Pump from Poliwhirl, which actually seems to bother it. Poliwhirl then jumps in for a Mega Punch, which hits Torterra, but gives Ash an idea. He orders Meltan to use Thundershock on Torterra. The attack hits, but due to Torterra's electric immunity, doesn't damage it at all. What it does do is get conducted through the water coating Torterra's body and follow it back to its source, that being Poliwhirl. As a result, Poliwhirl is sharply electrocuted, twitching and jerking before falling unconscious. With the match over, Ash praises his Pokemon, but when he looks at Paul, his tag partner just growls that he could have won that on his own, and that Ash needs to stop interfering. After a break, the finals begin. Ash and Paul versus Caitlyn. Having returned to the Pokemon Center, Ash has his full roster with him, so chooses to make the finals his debut match with Chimchar. When the little monkey sees Paul, it looks concerned, but Paul refuses to acknowledge it at all, and chooses his Elekid. Elekid just sneers at Chimchar, but Ash says not to let those jerks bother it. They then watch as Caitlyn predictably brings out her Curlier, and they are all told to begin. Having cut all lines of communication, both Ash and Paul act autonomously, with Paul ordering a Thunder Punch, while Chimchar is told to use Flame Wheel. The two Pokemon rush Curlier, but Caitlyn boredly tells Curlier that it knows what to do. Curlier's eyes then light up, psychically manipulating Elekid to Thunder Punch Chimchar, while Chimchar rolls into Elekid. The attacks hit, and both are thrown away from each other. Ash and Paul then round on each other, with Ash saying that if Paul had waited a moment, this never would have happened, while Paul barks that this is just another example of him getting in the way. Their argument is interrupted by a yawn from Caitlyn, who says this melodrama has gotten boring, and so she's gonna end it. She then has Curlier use a Shadow Sneak, causing it to appear behind Elekid and slam a fist into the top of its head. Elekid falls, but remains conscious, and Caitlyn praises Paul for having trained his Pokemon well enough to withstand one of her attacks. However, she assures him that it can't handle two. To prove this point, she has Curlier use Psybeam to lift Elekid and slam it into the ceiling. There is a thud, and when it falls to the ground, Elekid is unconscious. This shocks both Ash and Paul, but Ash can't afford to be indecisive, and so yells for Chimchar to use Flamethrower. Chimchar manages to get the attack off, but before it can hit Curlier, it freezes the flames with its psychic power. Then, to add insult to injury, Curlier begins to shape the flames, turning it into a fiery Zangoose, and sending it back at Chimchar. Ash pleads with Chimchar to get away with Dig, but fear has it paralyzed, and it is terror more than damage, which makes Chimchar faint, ending the match. There is disappointment in Caitlyn's voice when she says that had the boys been able to work as one, she believes they could have beaten her, but since they couldn't, they proved to be her most boring foes of the whole competition. She then accepts the Soothe Bells for winning and goes to find Barry as the stadium empties. Eventually, it is just Ash and Paul, and Ash asks if Paul still wants that battle, but Paul says Ash isn't worth the effort, and he's not a shadow of his father. He then turns on his heels, leaving Ash to tend to Chimchar. When the little monkey sees Ash, it cowers, assuming he will punish it for failure. But instead, Ash picks Chimchar up and hugs it, thanking it for a great attempt. He then promises that together they will get stronger, until one day they can beat Caitlyn, Paul, and even his father. And that's where we're going to leave things. How far will Ash and Chimchar go together? Will they ever cross paths with Paul again? And where will our trio find their next battle facility? Find out when the journey continues.